Afternoon and welcome to the Full Scottish. My name is Brian Liddy and it's Sunday the 24th of November. I'm joined today by two guests. We've got Marion Fellows. Marion, you were the SNP MP for Motherwell and Wishaw from 2015 to 2024, and you were also the SNP's Westminster spokesperson on disabilities, and you've campaigned for many years for the victims of the post office scandal. Thank you for giving up a big chunk of your Sunday afternoon for us.
No, absolutely no problem. Delighted to do it here.
Thanks. And Hugh Marshall, another
Awesome. Nice.
staunch supporter of the programme, founder of Talking Wales. So again, thank you for joining us, Hugh, on Sunday afternoon.
You're welcome.
So today is the 1005th day of the war in Ukraine. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot has told the BBC in an interview that Western allies should not put any limits on support for Ukraine against Russia and not set and express red lines. Barrot's comments are significant, coming a few days after the US and UK long-range missiles were used in that way for the first time. Barrot said that Ukraine could fire French long-range missiles into Russia in the logics of self-defence, but would not confirm if French weapons had already been used. Pat McFadden, a senior UK minister, is expected to tell a NATO cybersecurity conference in London on Monday that Russia is exceptionally aggressive and reckless in the cyber realm, and no one should underestimate the threat to UK infrastructure and businesses. Ukraine has lost over 40% of the territory in Russia's Kursk region that it rapidly seized in a surprise incursion in August, as Russian forces have mounted waves of counter-assaults, according to Reuters. The report said Russia has deployed about 59,000 troops to the Kursk region since Kyiv's forces swept in and advanced swiftly, catching Moscow unprepared 2.5 years into its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Vladimir Putin on Saturday signed a law that allows those who sign up to fight in Ukraine to write off unpaid debts worth almost $100,000. The legislation will allow those who sign a one-year contract to fight in Ukraine after the 1st of December to free themselves of existing bad debts. It also covers their spouses. Putin has threatened to launch more strikes than an experimental intermediate-range ballistic missile as Ukraine decried the testing of the nuclear-capable weapons. I'll read that again, I'm sorry. Putin has threatened to launch more strikes using an experimental intermediate-range ballistic missile as Ukraine decried the testing of the nuclear-capable weapon on its territory as an international crime. Speaking at a defence conference on Friday, Putin contested US claims that Russia possessed only a handful of the high-speed ballistic missiles, saying that the military had enough to continue to test them in combat conditions and would put them into serial production. US President-elect Donald Trump is considering making Richard Grenell, his former intelligence chief, a special envoy for the Russian-Ukraine conflict, according to reports. Grenell, who served as Trump's ambassador to Germany and was acting director of national intelligence during Trump's 2017-2021 term, would play a key role in Trump's efforts to halt the war if he is ultimately selected for the post. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is making a diplomatic trip to Europe that includes a meeting of foreign ministers from the leading industrialised nations that will focus on the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. Russia has included the territories it occupies in Ukraine in its recent greenhouse gas inventory report to the United Nations, drawing protests from Ukrainian officials and activists at the COP29 climate summit this week. Russian drone and missile attacks have damaged 321 Ukrainian port infrastructure facilities since July 2023, Volodymyr Zelensky said on Saturday. 20 merchant ships belonging to other countries were damaged by Russian strikes, he added. Ukraine's air defence units destroyed more than 10 Russian drones that were targeting Kyiv in an overnight drone attack, Ukraine's military said on Sunday. Russia says its air defence system destroyed 34 Ukrainian drones overnight, including 27 over the Kursk region bordering Ukraine. Marion, that's probably one of the lengthiest Ukraine updates that I've read. Perhaps is that a sign of the conflict escalating in the region, do you think?
I definitely think so. I think we don't know where we are. There's so many undecideds and undecipherables with Trump coming in. I really think that's the most important thing at the moment. Which way will he actually jump?
Everything's gone in here. Hugh, we're having technical difficulties here in the studio. So if my colleagues are correct, you can hear me. So, Hugh, any thoughts on the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, just echoing what Marion was saying. It it's just very sad, and as it is due basically to the fact that the transition is happening in the United States, and Putin is he's clearly out of control. The fact that he's been making threats of his right to use nuclear weapons when he's actually got North Korean soldiers fighting on his behalf is just bizarre. We all know that Putin, he likes rattling his sabers, but I think what's interesting is just the economic impact this is having on Russia and how long they can continue with this war, because it is costing them a lot of money. Yes, they are getting support from China and North Korea and Iran, but financially, it is. I would imagine it's starting to take its toll. So we'll see what happens when Trump takes over. But I don't, hopefully it'll sort of lead to an end to the fighting. But Putin isn't the kind of person who's going to sort of give something up without saving face.
Thank you, Hugh. And as you were saying, Marion, the big unknown is Trump, who's going to be coming in January. And now for the update from Gaza and the Middle East. At least 44,176 Palestinians have been killed and 104,473 wounded in Gaza since the 7th of October 2023, and more than 3,670 have been killed and 15,400 wounded in Lebanon this week. This week, sorry, not that have been killed so far. This week, the ICC issued arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant and Mohammed Deif. But will there ever be arrests? Hugh, I'd like to come to you first on this one, and if you could maybe bring in something to do with Keir Starmer and his position, and maybe perhaps David Lammy as well.
Yeah, because it was interesting how they were quite vague at the beginning with the ICC ruling. But I'm glad that they did clear that up. I think one of the things that's interesting is the report this week is that they're very close to agreeing to a ceasefire with what's left of Hamas. But again, it's Netanyahu who is holding things up, and it is frustrating as well with with people being critical of the Israeli government and Netanyahu, and being equated with anti-Semitism. I think it's clear you can be sort of against the war and the Israeli government, but and still have support for the people of Israel. But it's Netanyahu. Again, waiting to see what happens with Trump, because Netanyahu knows that that as soon as he sort of stands down, he's facing sort of criminal action, not from the ICC, but from his own from the courts in Israel as well. So it's sad, and it's just sad that, again, with Gaza, that it's been going on for a while now, and it does slide down people's sort of interests and radar. It's an incredibly sad situation, and the sooner hopefully that we can get rid of Hamas, hopefully as well have a change in government in Israel as well, and come up with a long-lasting peace. But that's a lot to ask, considering the history of Israel and Palestine.
Thank you, Hugh. So, Marion, is it interesting to note that the ICC, the International Criminal Court, it doesn't have a problem with the actual military action that Israel's taken out in Israel. Its problem is that Israel knowingly and intentionally denied food, water, medicines and electricity to civilians in the region.
I think that's the important point, and it is interesting that they don't seem to have a problem, as you said, but it's more about the civilians not getting access to water and food. And although they are saying, or they've tried to put food and water back in to Gaza, it hasn't worked. But what's also interesting is the shift in now the Labour government's view. I mean, I can remember being soundly harangued in Parliament calling for a ceasefire, and actually the moves that we had to make in the Parliament to get Labour to come to any kind of decision, they seem to have moved away from the Israel is right to do what it's doing and should continue, and as if they have a right to defend their country no matter what they do, and they've moved away from that not before time. I think it's interesting as well what they've been saying about the arrest warrant on Netanyahu and all. It really is interesting that they're saying, they will deal with criminal, they will support the ICC, all of that. But any notion of Netanyahu voluntarily arriving in the UK is for the birds. But it's really interesting as well. We go back to Trump. Netanyahu may well be able to go to the US as well as Hungary and other states. But I think it's a long, slow trip. And again, in the middle of all this, the hostages still haven't been recovered. I think the chances are that most of them will be dead. I think most people accept that. But we have to end this, what is genocide and slaughter in Gaza, and the fact that people are moved every week it would appear, where they have nowhere to go and they lose more and more of what little possessions they had when this whole thing started.
Thank you, Marion. So the next item is COP29. Late last night, COP29 signed off a $300 billion climate deal after delegate groups from poorer nations walked out of the finance meeting in anger. The deal provides $1.3 trillion a year in funds for developing countries to move to a low-carbon economy, but only $300 billion will come from grants and low-interest loans paid by wealthy developed countries. Marion, that's the big. This COP's been labelled as the finance COP, and
Yes.
that is the thing that they're trying to hammer out, isn't it? Is like rich developing countries who have mostly caused climate change are going to have to cough up and pay for less developed countries so that they can cope with climate change. Have you been following COP? Have you seen any evidence of greenwashing or?
A bit, not in depth, but I thought it was interesting that just a few days ago, there was no sign whatsoever of any kind of agreement. I think everyone would agree that this deal is not good. It's not good for poorer nations. It's not good for the low-lying nations, and there are real holes in what's happened. But the fact that they've hammered out some kind of deal is helpful going forward. I mean, it may well take young people across the world following Greta Thunberg, what happened the last time when COP wasn't doing enough for future generations. It may take something like that to keep things moving forward. There's no easy answer to this, but I think developed countries have to do more to support smaller countries, developing countries who have the problems that we've caused in the past.
Thank you, Marion. Hugh, have you been following COP? Have you got any thoughts on how it's going?
Yeah, well, I was surprised because I was listening to some coverage on the radio, and I mentioned, that there were a couple of hundred of, lobbyists from the oil and gas industries there. So it's obviously, there's a lot of sort of trading and dealing going on around, what can and what can't be done. The worrying thing is, COP every year, it's the same situation, no agreements. Then, last minute they pull something out of the bag. But when we see past COPs, and sort of the money that was allocated for sort of nations, sub-Saharan nations, I think something like 300 million, and only something like 30 million has actually gone through. So I think what we need to do as well is actually follow up on what previous ones have agreed and see what's happened with it. I think the positive from this one is that China are now more engaged. But obviously, I would imagine in about 6 weeks' time, the US will be pulling out, thanks to Trump.
That's the real danger overall.
Yeah, Marion, COP, I mean, I was reading in The Guardian today, a question was, does COP matter? And they said that it does matter. I mean, the implication was that it really is all that we've got. It might not be brilliant. Apparently more than 1,700 fossil fuel lobbyists turned up alongside a huge presence from clean energy and climate solution interests. Do you think COP is going to actually cut any muster in the long run?
Well, in the long run, I'm not entirely sure. I think the fact that people are still talking, the fact that the oil and fossil fuel lobbyists are in the ascendancy really has to be stopped. But that's not a big surprise considering the venue as well. Baku is an oil producing state. Baku it is the centre of the oil producing state in that part of the world, and it really is. It's the kind of place you have to have a COP conference, but it's probably not the best and most supportive to move things forward in the longer term. It's all we've got as a world at the moment, COP, and that we really need to support COP as much as we possibly can, but we also need to make sure that the financial side and all the deals that have been made in the past and some that are being made in Baku are actually implemented. That's the real issue.
Thank you, Marion. Hugh, I don't know, it really is time to move on to the next item, but is there anything that you wanted to add? I mean, I'm just thinking that, I don't know if we've mentioned that this fact that the result of COP this time is that there is a deal now in place, or a system in place where rich, wealthy countries can trade off their carbon emissions by planting trees and saving rainforests in other countries. Is that a good thing?
Yeah, anything is good, but that there is this feeling that we carbon capture, that we can carry on as we are. We need to cut down our reliance on oil and gas, and until we actually start sort of addressing that, it's going to be a huge issue. And obviously, we're going to have 5 years now of baby drill in the US. Fracking is going to come back because they're going to try and sort of basically fill their pockets during the 5 years of Trump's tenure. So I think we need to look beyond the next 5 years, beyond Trump, and see what happens. I think it's in Madrid next year, so it'll be interesting to see from how the Spanish approach it, because obviously Spain has had sort of huge impacts. We saw the floods in Valencia, killing around 200 people, and I think today we're seeing the impact in Pontypridd in South Wales. The River Taf has burst its banks again for the second time since 2020, flooding dozens of houses. So it's just becoming a common occurrence. But until we can sort of wean ourselves off oil and gas, it's a challenge. And I know we'll talk about it later, but what policy is happening now around things like GB energy just isn't helping the situation at all.
Thank you, Hugh. Speaking of GB energy, The cost of energy is the next item. So Ofgem have announced another increase to the energy cap this week. So what has happened to Labour's election promise to bring energy bills down by £300? Instead, bills have gone up by by £470 per household. The SNP have published some research that revealed that severe weather warnings for snow and ice in Scotland were more than double those in London and the southeast of England last year. The SNP, and this is we had Storm Bert, obviously at the moment. The SNP research shows that in total there were a combined 71 snow and ice severe weather warnings last year. In comparison, there were only 27 in London and the southeast of England. And this comes a week after a week that witnessed severe weather warnings and freezing conditions throughout Scotland. Marion, that thing about Labour's promise to bring bills down by £300 when instead they've gone up by more than £400. I'm just wondering, your experience in Westminster, is there anything that you can bring to that and let us know about Labour, what you think of Labour?
I don't think what I think about Labour in this regard is actually politely enough for me to actually comment. But what I will say is that when I was in Westminster, I was trying to introduce a social energy tariff. And that's really what's needed. The Labour have promised much and delivered very, very, very little. GB Energy is going to be a front. It's not going to produce energy. It's going to just allow energy companies to make more money. And it's really, really difficult to see how Labour can fulfil that promise to bring down energy bills by £300, as you already said. They've already gone up. And the fact that they're talking about the energy cap, even the way that the energy cap has been calculated over the last 5 years has changed. So it's made to look a smaller increase than it actually is. And that was under the Tories. Labour have done nothing to shift that either. It is really, really important. And it's really important that Scottish Labour MPs, who are in the majority now of Scottish MPs, actually put out there how cold Scotland is, how different Scotland is, because no one really seems to understand down there that it might only be. I have a friend who lives near Brighton. I've sent her a picture of the snow yesterday, and she said, "Oh, but we've got some high winds, and that's it." And that's where the real issue lies. Westminster doesn't get the difference in climate, the difference that we're suffering with things like Storm Bert. It's only when and if it affects England that actually things are done. But social energy tariff is a must. It has to happen. It must happen because too many people are actually going to die of cold this winter. And the fact that the first thing Labour did was to get rid of the universal winter fuel payment allowance, it just speaks volumes about what they really think and what they are really prepared to do to help folk in Scotland.
Thank you, Marion. Hugh, I'm interested in what's happening in Wales. In Wales, you've got what Anas Sarwar hopes to bring into Scotland, which is a Labour government, and you've got a Labour government in the Senate and a Labour government in Westminster. Sarwar, who was given an award, Herald Scottish Politician of the Year this week, he instructed his own MPs to, or he was happy with Scottish Labour MPs in Westminster to back a means testing for the winter fuel payments, and he also instructed his own MSPs in Holyrood to vote against it, and called for when Holyrood was calling for means testing for winter fuel payments to be ditched. Now he's turned and he says that if Labour win in 2026, then he'll reintroduce a universal winter fuel payment for pensioners in Scotland. Is there anything like that coming out of Wales, the Labour government in Wales?
Well, yeah, and I think one of the issues is obviously the situation between Wales and Scotland is slightly different because obviously from a devolution point of view, there are certain bits that are more devolved in Scotland than they are in Wales. So this isn't something the Welsh government could really sort of intervene in, if they wanted to. But again, I couldn't believe when I heard on the radio that Anna Sawa was saying that if you vote for Labour in the 2026 Holyrood elections, we'll reinstate the winter fuel payments, as if it wasn't his own Labour government in Westminster who'd actually stopped it in the first place. And my understanding is, through Barnett consequentials, sort of Scottish government have lost about £150 million. So even if Scottish government wanted to bring this in, they wouldn't be able to do it. So it's just this double standards and double think. But I think it is going to have an impact in Wales in the long term. The longer it goes with Labour in Westminster and Labour in the Senedd in Cardiff, and things not improving and things not changing here, then it's going to be bad for them come the election in 2026.
Yeah.
Thank you, Hugh. Marion, I'm just wondering have you heard anything from your contacts within the SNP in Holyrood? Do you know if the rumours that John Swinney is going to reinstate universal winter fuel payments, basically mitigate once again, what's coming from Westminster? Have you got any insight?
I have to say I don't have any personal insight. But of course, whatever John Swinney, the Scottish Government, decides to do, even though they've had an enhanced block grant from Westminster through Barnett consequential and all the rest of it, it really means that because of increased inflation and prices in general for the government, there's not going to be huge amounts of money lying spare. So if he is going to bring back the winter fuel payment universally in Scotland, there will be other consequences of that. So what might happen to money for the NHS, money for police, money for ferries? Scotland can only spend what it gets from the UK, and it's very, very tightly controlled in what it can actually do.
Thank you, Marion. And a related topic to the cost of energy, the cost of living. Not only are we going through a period with energy and food price increases, we're also seeing mortgage increases running ahead of pay rises. And all of this is made worse by cuts to social security. How can ordinary people afford the cost of living in the UK? Hugh, have you any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, well, we saw inflation increase again, and the economy flatlining. So when you have a government that comes in that has a completely non-radical agenda, that has been elected on 5 or so vague promises of GB Energy will bring down fuel prices, that will grow the economy, and then use that to invest in public services. It doesn't look as if that's going to happen anytime soon. And this pretense that sort of Brexit hasn't had a major impact on our on the UK economy is ridiculous. And the longer Labour go on saying decision was taken, everything, we just got to make it work, especially now with Trump coming in, is what's going to happen there? If they do bring tariffs in, people talk about special relationship with the United States. Trump doesn't care about relations with anyone. The whole point of how he got elected was this, sort of making the USA insular, that it's not going to be, sort of interested in, the rest of the world, and just doing things for their own benefit, which potentially will have, a huge impact on their economy. If you believe what economists say. But yeah, the cost of living, it's just people just don't feel they're getting any, things aren't getting better. People were hoping, and people didn't vote for Labour that that there was going to be a great change. They were voting against the Conservatives, and the only people who are going to benefit from this in the long term are reform. because they're doing what Trump was saying is, we'll promise you this, that, and the other, with zero actual policies and plans on how to deliver it. Just this populism of, vote for us and, everything's going to be great because we're not like the other ones. And, when we look at the Holyrood and Senedd elections in 26, I see that, Reform is starting to sort of make headway in Scotland. But in Wales, they're neck and neck with, Labour in the lead, Plaid a second, but they're neck and neck with the Tories. So, there's when it comes to the election in 2026, it could be, a 4-horse race in Wales, which, if Reform do well, God knows what's going to happen.
Yeah, thank you, Hugh. Marion, Hugh was talking about reform there. I was reading a piece in the National which said that yes, the reform are going to be in Holyrood in 2026 because unionists are switching from voting for the Conservatives in Holyrood to vote for reform. And basically, it's going to split the vote, and they will be there, but they won't be able to actually do anything. But sticking to the cost of living and going back to energy, I mean, in Scotland, NHS workers are among the best paid, teachers are among the best paid in the UK, but any benefits from wage rises in the public sector are just getting wiped out by things like rising prices and fuel bills and the like. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
No, things are getting worse. The kind of taxes on business that through NIC are really going to affect people, because smaller businesses will struggle to pay that extra bill. That means local businesses may close. It means people have to travel further. The more unemployment, and the idea of one of the ways that Labour is trying to balance the books is on the back of people who need and deserve social security is absolutely abhorrent. I mean, I was interested, I saw there's a petition been signed by, last time I looked, it was 170,000 people calling for another general election. Now, I think that would probably be the worst thing almost. But Labour seemed to be tied to Tory policies, tied to not spending, as Hugh said. There was no radicalism. They could do things differently, instead of which they're clinging to the fact that Brexit happened and they're not going to overturn it. They're clinging to the fact that all these Tory policies that made things worse for people in general, and they're not going to do anything about that. They seem to have lost their way within the first, how many months is that now? 5 months of their government. They're supposed to have been preparing for government for months and years. It looks as though everything was done in the back of a fag packet, and there's no way forward. They were told during the election about the huge deficit in public finances. They refused to believe it, they ignored it, and they're facing the reality of it, using a system and using methods that actually aren't working. So there has to be some radical rethink, and there has to be some real action for this government to support the most vulnerable in our society. And I'm not just talking about older people like myself. I'm fine, I don't need it. But I'm talking about the disabled community who are living in daily terror of having their benefits cut.
Thank you, Marion. Hugh, I'm just again wondering about the Senedd. So Rachel Reeves increased, Marion mentioned there, the increased the employers' national insurance contributions, which is going to put costs up for businesses. But also, here in Holyrood, you hear the SNP, John Swinney, the First Minister, talking about the bill that the Scottish Government is going to face as a major employer. Councils, NHS, teachers, ultimately all that money comes from the Scottish Government to councils to hand out, or to the NHS. Is Plaid in the Senedd or Labour in the Senedd said anything about these increases that are coming down the line?
Yeah, well, it's something that's been raised. It's actually going to be worse in Wales because we have a higher percentage of people working in the public sector in Wales than in Scotland. So the impact is going to be huge. I think one of the issues we have in Wales, and it is a frustration. It's one of the reasons, why we're working on building a new sort of media platform for Wales. Is people just don't know what's going on, and people just accept things, because that's just the way things are. There needs to be a way of getting people to understand what is going on, who is responsible, and why. So again, we've had this, two Labour governments, one at each end of the M4, and how it's going to benefit Wales. And as I've said, sort of a few times now, when that doesn't come to fruition, and there's no sign of it coming to fruition, the people who are going to benefit are Reform. And it is terrifying, because we've had the experience in Wales. We had 7 or 8 UKIP members elected because the Senedd elections fell at the time of the referendum. It was sort of around the same time. So we've seen what sort of those people are like. They have no ideas. They have no understanding. They're just there to cause trouble and complain. Where we actually need politicians who can contribute to and to make Wales a better place. It is worrying, but people are getting their news and their information on what people are saying on Facebook and on social media, and there's no counter to that. So there needs to be a radical approach to ensure that the public in Wales, Scotland, and in England are better informed. So when they go to the ballot box, they're making an informed decision, not something based on something they've read on Twitter or Facebook.
Thank you, Hugh. Marion, I said at the start of the show that you were the SNP's spokesperson on disabilities, and this thing about how do people cope during a cost of living crisis. One of the things that helps people cope is social security payments and benefits. So I'm thinking really about specifically the winter fuel payments still. There were 2 quotes recently. I'll read them out to you. One from the Citizens' Advice said, "Without government action, millions are at risk of being left in the cold this winter and beyond. We are calling for the urgent introduction of energy bill support that is targeted at people who need it most." Hang on to that, targeted at people who need it most. Then this week, Keir Starmer said it makes sense to make the change to winter fuel payments, and said it was important to protect pensioners who most need the allowance. So can you help me spot the difference?
Well, the difference is Keir Starmer can do something about it. He can do something about how energy bills are paid. The crazy thing is that energy companies are looking for, are happy to support a social energy tariff, so that people who cannot afford the bills, but people who need to keep warm, that's the elderly and those with disabilities, then they want it. It's government that's standing in the way, and have no idea why. They could change things around, but they're choosing not to, for reasons that are just utterly beyond my comprehension. Absolutely beyond my comprehension. It's back to, even at the moment, where some people are getting the winter fuel payment because they're getting credits and they qualify, they're still scared to put their heating on, because this idea that you can that you're getting some money towards it, therefore you can keep your house as warm as you'd absolutely need and like, it's not happening. Because as people get older, especially, they get more and more frightened about large bills. And this cost of energy thing is going to poison people's lives for years to come, unless there is a radical reform. I mean, even the energy companies, they've got huge debts now because people can't afford to pay their bills. Excuse me. And though I don't want to feel too sorry for them, because I don't, I think it's really important that people feel able to turn on the gas, electricity, fire the boilers with other forms of energy, and just keep warm this winter and winters following.
Thank you, Marion. Hugh, I'm going to carry on and ask you about Labour in Wales, but compare it to Labour here in Scotland. So Anis Sarwar, as I said earlier on, he was quite happy for his Scottish MPs in Westminster to vote for the cuts to winter fuel payments and made his MSPs vote down a motion in Holyrood that would have reinstated universal fees. I've got a quote here, and now, of course, he said he's going to reinstate them if he wins again. It sounds to me almost as if it's like a bribe that Labour is making here in Scotland for the 2026. If you vote for us and make me First Minister, then I'll take away or reinstate what Labour has taken away. Are there similar? I mean, how does Labour in Wales deal with that? Are they making the same kind of claims?
Yeah, as I said, because the main areas of devolution in Wales are health and education. So things like benefits aren't devolved, so there's less leeway around those areas. But just from that perspective, we're looking at health outcomes, and I think the latest figures for Wales shown that they're at their worst ever, and they're the worst of any part of the United Kingdom. So it's interesting if you go back a few years. Keir Starmer, was saying that Labour in Wales was the blueprint for a Labour government in Westminster. Well, he certainly hasn't been saying that for quite some time, and there's no wonder why. But I think that's one of the issues, and I think one of the sad things is in Wales is it's causing sort of anti-devolution sentiment because of the lack of powers and the failure of the Labour government to sort of make a difference to people's lives. Because at the end of the day, people want their lives to be better. They want to be able to heat their homes. They want to be able to buy sort of Christmas gifts for their family and children. But people are having to not make those difficult decisions about what gifts to buy. They're having to make a decision about whether to eat or heat. And it's 2024, and as Marion said, that they had an opportunity. They could have been, and it's not even being radical, but just to sort of say, right, we are going to sort of spend on public services. We are going to improve people's lives, and and we will grow the economy in a positive manner. But as Marion said, they're just following Tory policies. So yeah, no, it's they're almost sort of hiding the fact, because before they were trumpeting, sort of Wales this end, Wales the other end. But it was interesting. We had the Labour conference in Llandudno. It was the spring conference, which bizarrely was cancelled because of the election. So that was held in Llandudno, and fair play, Eluned Morgan, the First Minister, she came out with some fighting talk and saying, I think clearly there are divisions between, sort of the Senedd, members, and how the MPs in Westminster. It's almost as if they're two separate parties, and I think those divides are going to become more apparent because they can't fight on the basis of sort of everything's fine now. Labour are in power in Westminster. They're starting to sort of question what the Labour government in Westminster are doing. So that's bad news for them in the long term.
Thank you, Hugh. And we've been talking about the cost of living, and the cost of living royally is the next item. So despite pressures on the cost of living, we this week found out that it cost £72 million for the coronation of His Majesty King Charles III and Queen Camilla, and there have been recent revelations about the royal family profiting from public bodies and charities such as the National Health Service and the RNLI, which prompts us to ask, should we reform the monarchy, and if so, how? Marion, what are your thoughts on the royal family?
I think we should just let them carry on the way they're doing. I think that would actually mean that we wouldn't have to reform them. I don't think public would stand for much more of what's been going on. That's just my own personal view, of course. I think it's, for many years I used to think that, well, monarchy, okay, it's what most people want, but I think the mood's changing. I think the mood's changing across the UK, but especially in places like Scotland. When you look at the people who are patrons of things like the RNLI and then charging them for putting life saving boats across their beaches, there's absolute hypocrisy. Can't go on. I think £72 million spent on what was supposed to be a pared back coronation is nuts. I think also the younger generation of royals, although there are fewer of them, and Charles still talks about cutting back, it's not working. The royal family cost us, excuse me, cost us in more than money. People look at them and think, why are we paying for this? Because they have untold wealth and they should be living off that, not taking money from the public purse.
Thank you, Marion. And Hugh, I'm tempted to ask you about kind of harking back to what we've been talking about. Keir Starmer is cut to winter fuel payments. So why aren't we taxing the royals and people like the royals, Google and Apple and the like, when they're about to become even more wealthy? Because there's going to be a change to the Crown Estates Act, which is going to make Charles even richer than he already is.
Yeah, and the Crown Estates, that's devolved in Scotland. Welsh Senedd members, Labour and Plaid Cymru and Lib Dem have said that they want that devolved in Wales. And what happens? It's not a priority for the people of Wales, according to Labour in Westminster. So we're now going to have a voice. There's going to be a person talking with the Crown Estates from a Welsh perspective. So again, it's this double standard of saying, Senedd saying one thing, Labour in the Senedd saying we want this to happen. Now we've got the government in Westminster. Oh, it's not a priority, which is always the case. The other thing I found interesting was, the Dispatches documentary. There was coverage of it on social. That's how I came across it, was on social media, and it was shocking, the revelations. But I haven't heard anything on sort of the national news services. I've heard a lot about Queen Camilla's chest infection, which meant that she couldn't attend the cenotaph or the Royal Variety performance. But I haven't heard anything about their financial affairs and how it's having an impact on charities. And again, it's this. I don't know. It's just that. I couldn't believe it. I was listening to the radio, and I think it was the King's birthday, and "God Save the Queen" was being played on the radio at sort of 7 o'clock in the morning, and I thought, God, are we living in Russia now? Is this? I just couldn't believe it. And again, 2024, we got a family who who are there because of history, and yeah, history is important, but it comes to a point now you're thinking, these people are in a very privileged position just because of birth, and what do they actually sort of contribute to society? What are the benefits? And it should be slimmed back, and and as Marion was saying, I think in years to come, you can see the people's sort of attitude towards the royal family. I think there's a generation above us who the staunch royalists, who are sort of dying out. So I think there is going to be a change in years to come, and I think that the people did like the Queen. And the Queen was, she was respected, and even people, I'm not, I'm a Republican, but I could see, that she did have some redeeming features. But I think Charles and Camilla, I think, and what's been happening with William and with Harry, and I think especially younger people are just seeing it as being ridiculous. And I think, I think potentially this is the beginning of the end for the royal.
Thank you, Hugh. Marion, Hugh mentioned double standards there. I thought, Hugh, that was an excellent question that you asked. What do they contribute to society? With that in mind, Marion, and Hugh also mentioned William. So William wants to end homelessness, I believe. Is that
Yeah.
double standards, or has he just got a brass neck, do you think?
I think there's a lot of brass neckery about. He could contribute some of his millions and stop taking money from the state from various means. And the fact that the Duchy of Cornwall and all of these estates that don't pay tax and all these estates that are raking money in from hospitals and all that, if he turned that into the public purse, or even better, took it and built houses for homeless people in that area, then I think people would have more respect for him. I think gradually, as Hugh said, people are less respectful. We look at other monarchies in Scandinavia, in the Low Countries, wherever, and they don't need, apparently, the kinds of funding that we give. They live quite simply, they carry out a constitutional role, whereas the British royal family seem to want it always. They'll pay a token amount of tax, but not tax on their real wealth, and they will continue to make more and more money at the expense of the citizens of the United Kingdom, like you. And I never used to be. I used to think, okay, it's fine, keep the monarchy. But now I'm totally against it. And I think it's time the left went. I don't know how we do it, but I think, as I said at the start, they're by their own actions and behaviours, they're cutting their own throats. And I think it's time to just let them do it.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Marion. I think I've got the same frog in my throat.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
so sorry.
it's good. So yeah, just one last thing on that before we move on. The question is, so Charles has given his consent to this new bill that's going to make him richer, and I'm sure we're going to find out whether any chance exemptions or privileges were demanded by Charles before he gave that consent. Time will tell. But the cost of living in Scotland, we often hear the SNP say that, they say it over and over, but is it true Scotland has the energy but not the power? Is it true? Do we have the energy but not the power to use it? Marion, what
Yes,
powers
that's
does Scotland have to improve the cost of living in
well.
Scotland?
They're limited. They are definitely limited using the block grant. But when you say Scotland has the energy but not the power, the fact that folk who in England get paid by the national grid for surplus energy, and in Scotland we have to pay to put things onto the national grid is an absolute disgrace, and it's been going on for years. And there's nothing the Scottish Government can do about that because it's all controlled by Westminster. And that's actually, that's why we need independence. We have the energy, we have all sorts of natural resources, but we're beholden to the rest of the United Kingdom for we can't do anything about it because of the Act of Union, because of the Scotland Bill, because of the actions. And no one at Westminster is willing to devolve energy to Scotland, because we would treat things differently and we would be much, much better off.
Thank you, Marion. Hugh, is there a similar expression or a similar sentiment in Welsh politics?
Definitely. As I mentioned, we got far fewer powers, so far fewer levers to do things. There are certain sort of tax raising powers available, but that haven't been used. But the fact is, we haven't got a lot of wealthy people living in Wales, and I think that goes for most of England as well. Remember, how much of the wealth of the UK is actually focused in London, because that's where the super rich are living. And I think that is, and I think, with things like GB Energy, it was a cynical ploy, about, we're going to sort of headquarter it in Scotland. I don't know if you heard Jürgen Meyer, the chair of GB Energy, gave his first sort of broadcast interview on Radio 4 this week, and it was sort of quite revealing, actually explaining what GB Energy is. It basically, it's there to invest in energy projects that potentially commercial backers wouldn't get involved in. So the more sort of innovative and risky projects. So, from an impact point of view, the amount of money that's available compared with what the actual industry itself is investing in renewable energies is quite small. And obviously, the big concern in Wales is, where we have got substantial inland wind farms. Obviously, the infrastructure, the pylons, are being put up. But the energy is, the pylons are there in order to extract energy from Wales. We create enough energy in Wales to supply the people of Wales. If we were independent, we could cut energy prices because we generate so much surplus energy. But the whole point of, sort of Wales and Scotland, and I would imagine, the north of England, are being used in order to provide energy for where the mass populations are in the south of England. And it's that extractive thing, I think, that people are concerned about, and it's having an impact, as Marion was saying, it's having an impact on our communities of having pylons being put up in order to take power out of Wales. And I think we need to be thinking far more about local power generation, how we generate, the wind farms that are generating power in Wales, how are those actually being used to service the local communities as opposed to being part of a national grid.
Thank you, Hugh. Marion, every now and again we get a guest on here who says that the SNP government in Holyrood, there are things that they could do, but they won't do, or they haven't done yet. Can you think of any examples of what that would be? I mean, is that a fair criticism? Is there?
I think some of it, well, politics is about choices. And if you don't choose to do things the way some other people think you should, then you're going to get criticised for it. With the best will in the world, I listened to this morning to Fiona Hislop talking about that terrible 5-letter word, ferry. Oh, maybe it's 7, ferries. And actually, it's the decisions that were made about awarding contracts, for example, to the firm in Glasgow to keep the jobs going and to keep the shipyard going. The Scottish Government at that point was being pressed by both Labour, Lib Dems, Tories to do that. Now, the Scottish Government did that, and now they're being hammered because they did it and because things did not go according to plan. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't believe that the Scottish Government was innocent of all charges in relation to ferries. Absolutely don't believe that at all. But you have to take the whole thing in a broader context, really. And you have to say politics is about choices. Some people will like the choices you make, and sometimes you make a choice and circumstances change, but you have to make these choices. And yes, of course, the Scottish Government could have done lots of things differently, but would, and we'll come back to Anas Sarwar, who says he'll bring back universal winter fuel payments. That's what he's saying now. It may not be possible if, God forbid, he gets into power in Scotland in next year. Things will change very quickly or very slowly. It doesn't matter, but things change. And of course, when any government makes a decision, people can criticise it looking back. Hindsight has 20/20 vision. I think we're all very aware of that.
Thank you, Marion. We're out of time, but yeah, just to cap on what you said about Sarwar, the Daily Record's political editor Paul Hutchin described it as vote Scottish Labour to reverse UK Labour policy. I mean, it is quite a remarkable position to hold. But that's the end of the show. Thank you, Marion, and thank you, Hugh, again, for putting up with me and your patience with me. I really appreciate it. I'll let you get on with what's left of the weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
well,
you.
That is it for this week's Full Scottish. But before we go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on your generosity. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly contribution, we thank you very much. We set our current fundraising target in April and we hoped to reach £36,000 by the end of the year. It's now November, late November, and we have raised £17,500, for which we're grateful. However, to pay our bills and survive, we need to raise the remaining £12,000 to get us back on target. Our costs every month are about £4,000, and we get donations from about £2,500 a month. We urgently need more regular subscribers, but we need to clear our debts as well. We're at crisis point and really need your donations right now to be able to pay our bills and survive. Our programmes will always be free to view, but if you could afford £5 a month, please do consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, or just donate whatever you can afford. It'll be appreciated. So once again, thank you to Marion Fellows and to Hugh Marshall for your contributions this weekend, and thank you for you at home for watching. Goodbye.